"You sure you can afford this, buddy? This isn't a Tim Hortons." The man behind the counter didn't even look up when he said it. He was reorganizing a display of cufflinks near the register, moving them from one velvet tray to another, with the careful attention of someone who believed the objects in his care were worth more than most people he'd ever meet. The man standing on the other side of the counter said nothing. His name was Dwayne O.C. Quarty, and he was 53 years old, and he had walked into Hargrove and Fitch Fine Menswear on Bloor Street West on a Tuesday afternoon in November wearing a pair of Carhartt work pants, steel-toed boots with dried mud on the left heel, and a gray zip-up fleece with a small tear along the bottom hem. He was carrying a paper bag from the shawarma place 2 blocks east, and he hadn't finished his lunch yet because he'd gotten a phone call that moved up the appointment by 40 minutes. He set the paper bag on the edge of the counter, quietly, and looked at the display case. "I'm looking for a suit," Dwayne O.C. Quarty said. "2, actually. Maybe 3 if something catches my eye." The man behind the counter, his name tag said Niall, finally looked up. Neil Prosser had worked at Hargrove and Fitch for 11 years. He had a gift, he believed, for reading people. He could tell within 30 seconds of a person walking through the door whether they were going to buy something or waste his afternoon. He prided himself on this. He mentioned it at dinner parties. He believed it was a skill. What Neil Prosser saw when he looked at Dwayne O.C. Quarty was work boots, fleece, paper bag, mud. "We start at $2,200, Neil said. His voice had shifted slightly, the way a gate shifts when someone applies just enough pressure to keep it from opening without technically closing it. "For the entry-level pieces, our made-to-measure line starts at $6,000. "Okay," Dwayne O.C. Quarty said. He was still looking at the display case. "Do you have the Zegna Trofeo in a charcoal? I saw it on your website." There was a pause, a very specific kind of pause, the kind that happens when someone says something that doesn't fit the story you've already decided you're telling. "We carry Zegna," Neil said carefully. "I'd have to check the inventory. And the Canali, the 1934 line, I want to look at it in navy." Neil set down the cufflink he was holding. "Why don't I get one of my colleagues to help you?" he said. It wasn't a question. He disappeared into the back. The colleague he sent out was a young woman named Brienne Taft, who was 26, and had been working at Hargrove and Fitch for 8 months, and still hadn't quite figured out how to read people the way Neil said you were supposed to. She came out from the back room still clipping her name tag on, and found a large, quiet man in work boots studying the stitching on a jacket sleeve that was hanging on a display mannequin. "Hi," she said. "I'm Brienne. Can I help you find something?" 3 suits, Dwayne O.C. Quarty said. "One for a board meeting, one for a gala in February, and one that I can wear to court if I need to without looking like I'm trying too hard." He paused. "Judges notice when you're trying too hard." Brian Taft blinked. "Okay," she said. "Do you have preferences on? Did you say court?" "I'm a civil litigation lawyer," Dwayne said. "I specialize in employment discrimination cases." He looked at her. "It's a reasonable field to be in." He wasn't smiling when he said it, but his eyes were. Brienne Taft felt something shift under her feet, and she decided, right then, that she was going to do her job properly. She pulled out a measuring tape from her pocket. "Let's start with your measurements," she said. Neil Prosser came back out from the stockroom 12 minutes later carrying a single garment bag, and he stopped when he saw what was happening. Dwayne O.C. Quarty was standing on the fitting platform at the back of the store, arms slightly out, while Brienne moved around him with her measuring tape and a notepad. There were 3 jackets laid out on the bench beside the platform. One of them was the Zegna Trofeo in charcoal. Another was the Canali Navy. The third was something from the new Corneliani arrival that had just come in last week, which Neil had been saving to show a specific client he had coming in Thursday. Neil walked to the counter and started straightening things that didn't need straightening. The store wasn't busy. It was 2:15 on a Tuesday. There were 2 other customers browsing near the front, a man in his 40s in a suit that suggested Bay Street, and a younger man who'd come in with him, probably an associate. They had looked up when Dwayne walked in. They were looking at the fitting area now with the particular kind of attention that people try to make look like isn't attention. Brienne said something to Dwayne. He said something back. She laughed. Neil picked up his phone and pretended to check something. What happened next was not dramatic. It did not involve raised voices or anything thrown or any moment that would look good slowed down in a video. And yet it was the part that Brienne Taft would think about, later, for a long time. A man came in. He was wearing a long wool coat, charcoal gray, the kind that costs more than most people's rent, and he walked the way people walk when they've been walking into places like this their whole lives. Not hurrying, not looking around, just arriving. His name was Fletcher Vane, and he was the regional director for a commercial real estate portfolio that included, among other things, the building that Hargrove and Fitch occupied. He was also, as of 8 months ago, Dwayne O.C. Quarty's client. Neil Prosser saw Fletcher Vane walk in and immediately came out from behind the counter. "Mr. Vane," he said. "We weren't expecting you until Thursday. Changed my schedule," Fletcher said. He was scanning the store, and then he stopped scanning because he'd found what he was looking for. "Dwayne," he said. Dwayne O.C. Quarty, standing on the fitting platform in a charcoal jacket that Brienne had just helped him into, looked over. "Fletcher," he said. "I thought you were in Calgary. Got back this morning." Fletcher Vane crossed the store and extended his hand, and Dwayne stepped down off the platform to shake it. "My assistant said you called. Something about the Henderson filing?" "I'll fill you in over dinner," Dwayne said. "Tonight, if you're free." "I'm free!" Neil Prosser stood approximately 4 feet away from this conversation and did not say anything. Fletcher Vane looked at the jacket Dwayne was wearing. "That's good on you," he said. "Is that Zegna?" "Canali," Dwayne said. He looked down at it. "I think I'm taking this one." "Take all 3, Fletcher said. "You've got the Whitmore Appeal in January and the Gala and... what's the other one?" "Board meeting." "Right. Take all 3. He glanced at Brienne. "He has good taste. Just let him pick." He said this without any edge, without any performance. He said it the way people say things when they simply believe them to be true. Brienne Taft nodded. She was writing something on her notepad, and she kept her face very still because she was afraid that if she let it move, it would do something she couldn't control. Neil Prosser had still not said anything. But here is the moment. Here is the part that matters. Because while all of this was unfolding, while Fletcher Vane and Dwayne O.C. Quarty talked quietly about a case and a calendar, while Brienne pulled the 3rd jacket from the bench, while the 2 Bay Street men near the front of the store had fully stopped pretending to browse, Neil Prosser did something. He walked up to Dwayne O.C. Quarty. Not to Fletcher Vane, to Dwayne. "Sir," he said, and his voice had changed again, the gate hinge quality completely gone now, replaced with something smooth and warm and entirely too late. "I want to apologize if when you first came in, I wasn't." Dwayne O.C. Quarty looked at him. He looked at him for a moment that lasted long enough to be a statement. "I know what you were," Dwayne said, "and I know what you weren't." He turned back to the jacket. "I'm going to take these 3, he said to Brienne. "For the alterations on the canali, I'll need them finished before January 15th. Is that possible?" "Yes," Brienne said. "Absolutely. I'll note that, and I'd like to work with you when I come in for fittings," Dwayne said. He wasn't looking at Neil when he said it. He didn't need to. "If that's something you can arrange." "Of course," Brienne said. Neil Prosser walked back to the counter. He straightened things that didn't need straightening for a long time. "You need to understand something about Dwayne O.C. Quarty. Not the suit-buying part, not the Fletcher Vane part. The part before all of that, the part that happened years before he ever walked into a store on Bloor Street, the part that made this story not just a story about a rude salesperson getting what he deserved, but about something older and more stubborn and more worth your time. Dwayne O.C. Quarty grew up in Scarborough, in a neighborhood that the people who lived there called the Borough, and the people who didn't live there called other things, quieter things, the kinds of things you say with a facial expression rather than a word. His father, Kwaku Ose Quarty, had come to Toronto from Kumasi in 1979 with 2 degrees, a reference letter from a professor at the University of Ghana, and the understanding, delivered to him by his father, who had delivered it seriously, without drama, that he would have to work twice as hard to be treated half as well. This was not bitterness, it was information. Kwaku had gotten a job maintaining equipment at a textile factory in Etobicoke. He had done this for 6 years while taking night courses. He had eventually become a mechanical engineer with a stamp in an office. He had raised 3 children in Scarborough. He had told all of them the same thing he had been told, not as a complaint but as a briefing. This is the terrain. Know it, navigate it. Don't be surprised by it. Dwayne had taken this seriously. He had also, when he was 37, won a case against a Bay Street firm that had systematically passed over 11 black employees for promotion across 4 years. The settlement was sealed. But the firm's hiring practices changed. That was the part that was public. That was the part Dwayne cared about. He had thought about that case on the way into Hargrove and Fitch. He thought about it not because he was expecting trouble, but because he thought about it often, the way you think about a compass. It oriented him. His father used to say, the way a person treats you when they think you don't matter tells you everything about their character and nothing about yours. Dwayne had repeated this to so many clients over so many years that it had started to feel like something he'd invented, which embarrassed him sometimes. He always corrected himself. My father said that, he would say, not me. The older Bay Street man came up to Dwayne near the door while Brienne was processing the order. Excuse me, the man said. He was probably 60, silver-haired, the kind of tan that doesn't come from Ontario weather. I hope you don't mind me saying, I heard what that fellow said to you when you walked in, the staff. Dwayne looked at him. I should have said something at the time, the man said. I didn't. I want you to know that I noticed. There was a silence. What's your name? Dwayne asked. Alastair Morrow. Mr. Morrow. Dwayne picked up his paper bag from the counter, the one with his half-finished shawarma in it, which had been sitting there this whole time, unjudged now, just a bag. What you did just now is more useful than what you didn't do then. He looked at the man steadily. But don't let it go both ways twice. Alastair Morrow nodded. He looked for a moment like a man recalibrating something. The younger man with him, the associate, had taken out his phone. He was making a note. Whether it was professional or personal, Dwayne couldn't tell. It didn't really matter either way. Outside, Fletcher Vane caught up to him on the sidewalk. You all right? Fletcher asked. He said it the way people say it when they genuinely want to know. Fine, Dwayne said. It was nothing new. It shouldn't still be something old. No, Dwayne agreed. It shouldn't. They walked half a block together in the November cold, the kind of cold that comes off Lake Ontario with purpose, with intention. A streetcar went by. Somewhere nearby, someone was selling roasted chestnuts out of a cart, the smoke drifting sideways. You're a good lawyer, Fletcher said, which seemed like an abrupt thing to say, but wasn't. I know, Dwayne said. Not a lot of people say that about themselves. My father taught me not to wait for other people to say it first, Dwayne said. Takes too long, and they usually get the timing wrong. Fletcher Vane laughed. It was a real laugh, the kind that arrives before you've decided to laugh. Dinner at 7? Fletcher, 7, Dwayne said. They went separate directions. The chestnut smoke followed Dwayne for a moment before the wind changed and took it somewhere else. Brienne Taft, closing up that evening, stood at the counter going through the order form. 3 suits. Made to measure on 2 of them. Alterations on the canali, ready by January 15th. She had made a note on the file. Client preference. Request Brienne for all fitting appointments. She put the form in the folder. She looked up. Neil Prosser was at the other end of the counter, doing the end-of-day cash count. He was focused on the bills in his hands, counting quietly, moving his lips slightly. Neil, she said. He looked up. She didn't say anything for a moment. She just looked at him, the way you look at something when you're deciding whether it's worth saying out loud. She decided it was. When someone walks in, she said, You don't know who they are. Neil looked back at the bills. I've been doing this 11 years, he said. I know, Brienne said. That's what worries me. She picked up her coat from the hook behind the counter and put it on and left. The door closed behind her with the small, precise sound of a latch engaging, the kind of sound a well-made thing makes when everything is working as it should. On the 17th floor of a building on Bay Street, at 7:45 that evening, Dwayne Osiquarty and Fletcher Vane sat across from each other at a restaurant that did not have its name on the outside of the building, which is the kind of thing that happens when a restaurant is old enough and confident enough not to need it. They ordered. They talked about the Henderson filing. They talked about Dwayne's daughter, who was in her first year at Osgood. They talked about Fletcher's youngest, who had just decided to move to Prince Edward Island to start an oyster farm. A decision that Fletcher had received with the particular dazed acceptance of a man whose children continue to surprise him. At some point, Fletcher said, What was it that guy said to you? In the store. Dwayne thought about it. He asked if I was sure I could afford the place, and Dwayne unfolded his napkin, and then I bought 3 suits. Fletcher raised his glass. To knowing what things cost, Fletcher said, and what they're worth, Dwayne said. They drank. Outside, the city moved the way Toronto moves at night in November. Not loudly, not slowly, just continuously, with the particular energy of a place that has been doing this for a long time and plans to keep doing it. The CN Tower was lit up over the water. The streetcars ran their lines. Somewhere on Bloor Street, the lights in Hargrove and Fitch were off. The displays were dark. The jackets hung in their places, patient, waiting for morning. In a folder behind the counter, an order form had a client's name on it in Brienne Taft's careful handwriting. 3 suits, January 15th on the alterations. The name on the form was Dwayne O.C. Quarty, and that was, in the end, exactly enough.